Hello, welcome to your international 6th of November press review from Levant TV in London. Starting from The Guardian, which leads its front page reporting that police are considering to launch a criminal investigation into allegations that staff at a general hospital were bullied and pressured into falsifying information about patients' cancer care. It features a picture of one of the 1,400 pieces of art found in Germany yesterday after a routine tax investigation. It also features an article written by Russell Brand following his Jeremy Paxman interview last week on a report on the British ambassador in Berlin being called for a meeting at the German Foreign Ministry to explain the secret surveillance clam. And The Independent leads its front page with German Vents in his fury at British spying operation as Britain's ambassador is called by the German Foreign Ministry following allegations disclosed by the newspaper. It also reports on the payday lender Wonga being accused of grooming children after a research reveals that under-10s are repeated their advertising slogans, and it reports on the police investigation amid hospital care concerns. The Times front page leads with the news of hospitals being at bursting point with admissions at record levels as new reports emerge of a hospital cancer unit being under criminal investigation. Its front page features a picture of a snow-covered village in Durham as it prepared for bonfire night. And the Daily Telegraph leads its front page with news on a senior Conservative MP offering to use his political contact to set up business deals. Like other papers, it also reports on the criminal investigation into an Essex hospital and reports on a new VIP visa service for wealthy foreigners. Now let's take a look at top stories in the Middle East. Looking at the Morsi trial, Egyptian political commentator Bassem Sabri writes for Al Monitor an article headlined "Another Egyptian President on Trial." Here, Sabri compares Mohammed Morsi and Hosni Mubarak's trials. He says that among all the mounting violence and anger, he remembers seeing a peculiar yet highly expected photoshopped image at the time. It was an image with Morsi's face cropped over a famous photograph of Hosni Mubarak behind bars during his trial. He adds the person who posted the image said 2013 won't end before this man is behind bars. He had no doubt whatsoever, and I obviously had all the doubt in the world, but it looks like, well, Egypt continues to be a country where the unlikely is more likely. He goes on to say that Morsi's trial footage published by Egyptian paper Al Watan was the first time the public had seen Morsi since July 3rd. It was all sanctioned footage, unlike the original live broadcast of the beginnings of the Mubarak trial. Sabri states that the trial was adjourned to January, suggesting that these might quite the long proceedings, like the Mubarak case, and Morsi was then moved to the prison, where he now wears that white jumpsuit. The writer adds he is the former prisoner that became an utterly unexpected president and then became stunningly unexpected prisoner again, all in less than 3 years, and he is the second Egyptian president, and to an extent regime, to undergo trial within the same period as well. Simply unbelievable. The writer sees that Mubarak had and has a base of supporters, and they saw him as largely innocent, or at least deserving to be spared trial. But many acknowledge his long era and entourage, and even the man himself, to be deeply flawed, corrupt, and not the ideal that Egypt should aspire to. Sabri adds, for many, the question of sparing him for a trial was predominantly a matter of age and dignity, and appreciation of his military past. However, Sabri explained that Morsi represented a larger, more passionate base of supporters. He was a guarantee of security and inclusion after a troubled long era for Islamists. Everything that Morsi was seen to have erred in was largely justified. And to conclude, Sabri claims that there is now a dangerous and profound rift in the country that will not likely be healed anytime soon, and it's manifested in almost every family, workplace, and in friendships. It will take so long and so much before Egypt could sufficiently recover, before everyone could feel again that they are part of a country that is sufficiently united in looking forward. The man on trial had a chance to enter history as a force of national unity for positive change and inspiration, even with everything that was against him. But he became, for almost everyone outside his most ardent base, anything but that. Writing from Haaretz, Svi Barel analyzes Morsi's trials in an article headlined with "In Egypt, the revolution wore a judge's robe." Barel introduces the article saying the trial of the second Egyptian president to be prosecuted within 2 years appears to be another test of the Egyptian justice system, which seeks to demonstrate that it is independent and unbiased. He explains the tragic events of Al-Ittihadiyya constituted a political breakthrough not only amongst Morsi's opponents, but also among members of the Muslim Brotherhoods themselves. Many of its young activists left the group after the events, and some announced the formation of an independent group. Several high-ranking activists left the group, and among the remaining leadership, a heated debate broke out between those who supported and even started the demonstrations and those who opposed them. The writer points out that Morsi's opponents who participated in the demonstrations and were involved in violent activity cannot disclaim responsibility, and not only because of their active part in the demonstrations. He adds the contribution to the army's takeover and the granting of legitimacy to the current non-elected regime undermined one of the essential foundations of the January 25th revolution, which gave the Muslim Brotherhood legal status and power, was the support of some of the liberal movements. Barel indicates that Morsi's removal, which was accompanied later by the administrative measures outlawing the Muslim Brotherhood's activity, put people in mind of the Mubarak era, but this time the army and its loyalists in the political leadership are trying to sketch out the difference between themselves and Morsi's deposed regime, against which the legal struggle is still going on. The writer goes on to explain that the purpose of the trial now is not only to convict the acquit of the man responsible for the events of Al-Ittihadiyya, but also mainly to give institutional legitimacy to the fight against the Muslim Brotherhood and the settling of accounts with them. Barel adds the significance of Morsi's trial goes far beyond in an ordinary criminal trial for incitement, violating public order and endangering national security. And to conclude, Barel says, as far as the enemy is concerned, the outcome of the trial cannot be anything other than the sweeping conviction on the severe offences. But the justice system has already behaved unexpectedly by letting sure defendants go free, acquitting Hosni Mubarak of serious crimes, and convicting high-ranking figures who were supposedly untouchable. And the New York Times correspondent Sarah Sirgani, also covering the Morsi trial, writes an article headlined "Notes from Egypt's Show Trial." Sirgani believes that Morsi and Mubarak's trial are more similar than not. In less than 3 years, Egypt has brought 2 former presidents to the dock, and these cases, both politicized to serve the interests of the authorities of the day, have brought no credit to Egypt's judicial system or the rule of law. Sirgani quotes Mohammed Salim Al-Awa, a prominent Islamist lawyer dispatched by Morsi's political party to represent him. Mr. Al-Awa cited Article 152, which deals with the rules governing impeachment. This, he told the judge, is not a proper court to try a president. The writer recalls a defense lawyer asking her during one of many sideline discussions between lawyers and reporters at the recess, how come there is a clash between 2 sides and only one is brought to court? She adds, other lawyers pointed out that Mr. Morsi had been held incommunicado with no access to counsel until the access court break on Monday. Sirgani also points out that the civilians killed, tortured or injured since the fall of Mubarak are being represented in court against at least a few of the men they believe to be guilty with the anti-protester violence. Yet there are victims on all sides. Hundreds of Brotherhood members have been slain by the military since Mr. Morsi was ousted, and no government prosecutor is speaking for them. To conclude, Sirgani says the next hearing in Mr. Morsi's trial is scheduled for January the 8th. By then it should be clear whether he recognizes court's authority. It's already clear, however, that whatever justice this court renders will be partial at best. As senior diplomats from the United States, Russia and the United Nations failed on Tuesday to agree on a date for convening a long-awaited peace conference aimed at settling the Syria conflict, let's take a look at what the press is reporting. The Global Post's Tracy Shelton takes a look at how the war in Syria has become a terrible, tragic mess. Tracy interviews Turkish journalist Kamal Özkan, who has spent the last 2 years traveling throughout the rebel-held Syria. Oskan says freedom of movement in rebel areas has been increasingly difficult since major clashes between Kurdish forces, Islamic and secular groups began in March. Kamal says Islamic rebel groups have checkpoints on every road. Anyone Kurdish, any journalist, Syrian or foreign, is captured or killed no matter who they are or what they are doing there. Tracy says the Syrian conflict began as a revolution against the Assad government, but in March 2011, but it has since become a multifaceted war where opposition groups fight each other and kidnappings and executions take place on every side, often with sectarian motivation. Tracy goes on to look at the impact of the Al-Qaeda-backed ISIS, which has with reference to a female activist in Aleppo who sent a list via email of new regulations now being enforced in her area. These include strict dress codes for women, the banning of makeup, and the removal of advertisements with images of women and displays of women's clothing. The activist said women are now forbidden to sit in public areas while women's tailor shops with male employees have been closed. She concludes with an interview from a Syrian student who said, "We have lost almost everything. Our memories have been destroyed. We are afraid to return to our own cities. The Syria we knew is now gone." Lebanon's Daily Star published an article asking, is US policy in Syria changing following US Secretary of State John Kerry's talks with the Saudi leadership? Columnist Rami Khouri says, "I was struck a few days ago when I read US Secretary of State John Kerry's statement in Riyadh after talks with the Saudi Arabian leadership that the US had neither the legal authority nor desire to intervene in Syria." Khouri believes that it is worth asking if this is a new American posture on Syria and other issues in the region that might invite American or other foreign intervention. On the other hand, it could just be another typical example of a global power calling on its capacity for hypocrisy to get out of an awkward situation. Khouri thinks that it is, in either case, this is certainly worth examining, as it could have important implications for other situations. Khouri questions Kerry's statement, saying, did he mean that the American president required the approval of Congress before intervening militarily, or did he mean that some kind of international mandate was needed to provide legitimacy for any intervention? Khouri suspects it may be the former, but says this is slightly suspected because the US is already providing Syrian rebels with light weapons, technical aid and training. Khouri also analyzes the second part of Kerry's statement about the US not having the desire to intervene militarily in Syria, saying it is equally fascinating given the US had intervened militarily in many places in the region and is already involved in providing the anti-Assad rebels with military support of various kinds. What kind of desire is this that US simultaneously lacks and exercises across the Middle East? He adds that the American position on Syria is peculiar but not unusual. Washington has repeatedly taken contradictory positions on issues in the Middle East that end up leaving it and its allies confused and directionless. Khouri also points out on a key reason to why the United States is now in the process of adjusting its policies with key Middle Eastern states, saying that the US has gotten itself into a situation where all its key allies in the region, Arabs, Iranians, Turks and Israelis, have major problems and disagreements with it, and are not afraid to spell these out in public in some cases. And to conclude, Khouri questions Kerry's statement this week, saying Washington lacks both the mandate and the desire to intervene further in Syria, a small first sign that the US may be coming to grips with the self-imposed constraints of its own contradictions of recent decades. And the New York Times takes a look at UN envoy Lakhdar Ibrahimi's position in the peace talks, headlining the story, "Few eager to talk peace in Syria, but a mediator won't stop." Writer Somini Sengpa says Lakhdar Ibrahimi ways to navigate ways out of the war by looking for a course, while talk distinguishes his mediating style. Those who have worked with him say, and it has worked in his favor in the many conflicts he has mediated on behalf of the United Nations, holding elections in Haiti, forming governments in Iraq, ending a civil war in Lebanon. She says his latest mission, starting peace talks, has proved to be among the most stubborn, and navigating by sight has proved perilous, so far at least. She adds that those fighting on the battlefield do not seem eager to talk peace, nor to be powerful countries that support them. Scholars of the region say neither the United States nor Russia nor the regional powers with a direct stake in Syria can agree on what an acceptable outcome would be, let alone how to get there. And she adds, as one Western diplomat said, putting together a peace conference when no one wants one is not very straightforward. Somini said one of Mr. Brahimi's former assistants says he took the job because he knew no one else would even try. Another said the prospective collapse of a secular multi-ethnic Syria pains him. Quoting a former UN official who spoke on the coalition of anonymity, she writes he believed that if Geneva II did not happen in the next few weeks, Mr. Brahimi would step down. Now let's take a look at the top headlines from international papers. Starting with the Moscow Times, which leads its front page with the headline, Ethnic Affairs Ministry may be set up. And the international New York Times, which leads the headline, Art Rove in Germany abounds in mysteries. And China's Global Times leads its front page with the headlines, Beijing eyes Winter Games as it looks to host Olympics in 2022. And finally, the UAE's Gulf News front page leads with the headline, Textbook launch for India's Mars mission. Thank you very much for watching. I'll be back with you tomorrow for another press review.